All right, I think we're live. We're sweet. Is that, yeah, all right, I have the recording button on. Hey everybody, welcome to our open source panel discussion for the month of October for Hacktoberfest. I'm really excited to invite a bunch of awesome panelists. This was organized by Abby and Jackie here, who are gonna help with moderating and fielding questions. We're gonna do a discussion, and then the last 10 minutes will be Q&A. So for everybody watching, you can do the raise hand action in Zoom or post in the chat, and then we can call on you and read off a question for you or let you ask your question. And let's see, I guess I should say just a quick thing about Women Who Code for people who are new to our meetups. Women Who Code is a nonprofit or an international organization with chapters in countries all over the world. And I haven't checked the number in a while. Apparently we have more than 200,000 members. And we've been around for over almost 10 years now. So that's exciting. And I think it's been really cool that we can start to collaborate more with the New York chapter. Now that we're all, I wish it was for better reasons that we're doing so many more virtual events, but I'm glad that we're here making the most of it and ready to talk about open source. So I guess I'll leave it off to you, Jackie, if you want to introduce the panelists and kick us off.
Sure, absolutely. Let me sort of enable screen sharing again.
I also forgot how all these buttons work.
All right, so welcome everyone to our Hacktoberfest event. I'm so glad we were able to squeeze it into the end of October. For those of you who might not know, Hacktoberfest is this annual event hosted by DigitalOcean and Dev2 promoting open source contributions. So during the month of October, DigitalOcean actually will give you a free shirt or plant a tree in your name if you make 4 contributions to different open source projects. So in celebration of Hacktoberfest, we thought it'd be cool to get a panel together of both maintainers and contributors and really talk about the sphere of open source and talk about how to get engaged in the community of open source within Women Who Code. This event itself is a collaboration between Women Who Code Los Angeles and Women Who Code New York City. Women Who Code has networks around the world, and as Liz said, we're happy to be able to collaborate with different networks and work together on these virtual events, even though it might not be for the best reasons these days. So I'm going to get started with introducing our wonderful panelists. And for some housekeeping items, Women Who Code does have a code of conduct that you can check out on our website. Please adhere to the code of conduct. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and I will do my best to ask them of the panelists. We are recording the event, just letting you be aware of that. And yeah, if at any point you have any concerns, feel free to drop them in the chat. Cool. So Renee Phillips, I'm so glad to say that I've known Renee for a while now. She's the founder of Postgres Women in New York City and organizes events around data and Postgres in New York City. So I'm very excited to have Renee here with us today and to speak to her involvement in the Postgres community and trying to engage more women in the open source space. Melanie Sumner is a senior software engineer at LinkedIn and a core member of Ember.js. I myself don't work as much with JavaScript, so I'm so excited to learn from you today, Melanie. And then we also have Jessica Forde. Jessica is a good friend of mine. She is actually the one who got me involved with contributing to Jupyter notebooks, and she's a maintainer for Project Jupyter, along with her role as a machine learning researcher. And then we have Danielle Adams. So Danielle is the director of Women Who Code New York City and help us collaborate between Los Angeles and New York City. She's the Node.js Language Owner at Heroku, which means that she maintains the build packs for Node.js at Heroku. And on top of that, she's also a contributor to Node.js itself. That's our panelists today. I'm going to kick us off with sort of to each of the panelists here, maybe starting with Jessica. Tell us about your involvement with open source, what that has been like, and what your role within the projects that you contribute to have been. Jess, are you able to unmute?
Oh yeah, hi. Sorry. I got involved in maintaining Project Jupyter through a very funny way. Basically, if you're familiar with Project Jupyter, the Jupyter notebook used to be known as IPython, and the IPython notebook made that change over to Jupyter notebooks a couple years ago. And after that change, I was at a Python data science event, and there were some maintainers there, and I said, I find this transition to be a little confusing. A lot of the things I used to be able to do, it's not very clear of how to do them anymore. The people who were maintaining various libraries were very accessible, and we had some really great conversations. And based on that, eventually I ended up becoming a maintainer. So it's a really funny event about how that happened. I mean, sometimes you just go to events and you meet people, and people take on your feedback really well. I think one of the things that at least people are surprised when I tell them is that open source maintainers, at least in my experience, are very interested in getting feedback from people who use these tools every day. It's we aren't doing a lot of UX research if you're a open source project that's nonprofit. I mean, it happens from time to time, but it doesn't necessarily happen as consistently as we would like. So any sort of useful feedback of how you're using this tool ends up being really useful. And that's kind of what was the door to lead me to my role as a maintainer. So that's basically what happened. I also ended up doing some open source maintaining of projects within my university when I was doing my master's degree. There were some student-led open source projects, and that really was part of how I got interested in open source. And so that was how I gained some initial experience as well in a more constrained environment. So, if you have friends, or if there's a meetup group where people are maintaining a particular library of their own, that's a really great way as well. And so it wasn't necessarily totally out of my experience to me maintaining open source libraries. I also ended up maintaining an open source library that was doing some data science and machine learning functionality in Python. So that also led to me doing that up to the point where I was a maintainer of Project Jupyter. But I would say in general, though, a lot of these experiences of becoming a maintainer or becoming a contributor often just happens through one's experience working with the tool itself, and having some sort of thing that you're interested in and wanting to try to improve on or build upon based on that experience. And I think people really value that. So in all of the libraries that I've contributed to or maintained, I would say that's generally has been my in.
Okay, that's so fantastic. It makes a lot of sense that, open source maintainers and nonprofits might not have the luxury of doing user experience interviews, and having feedback from users is so valuable to them. And that's a great way to get in with that community.
Yeah, I definitely agree. If anyone has any questions about, what's the right way to approach it, I would generally say, I look at the contact forums, look at websites, look at how the culture of the GitHub issues works. Sometimes there's other places, I know Sometimes people have like online forums that are specifically targeted towards like feature discussions and things like that. That's what Project Jupyter has. There's also mailing lists. That's another common way. But basically, there generally is some sort of way in which user feedback or some sort of like user experience information ends up getting collected, and that if you feel as if maybe you don't necessarily want to take on a whole issue to start with, just having a conversation about what your workflow looks like is a really great way to start, and is a really easy contribution, because that sort of information is really valuable to people.
Awesome. So Danielle, now going into your experience of open source, you're a Node.js owner at Heroku. Tell us more about what that means and how you got involved with within your role at being able to sort of work with open source.
Yeah, so Heroku, for people that are unfamiliar with kind of the infrastructure, Heroku, you can build and run applications made from source code, and Heroku like takes care of the operating system environment and like the language environment. And so it's kind of like a stack, if you will, and then you have your source code that runs in that environment or runs a build. So build packs are how we maintain those like specific language environments. So we have build packs for every language that Heroku officially supports. So I am responsible for the JavaScript environment. And so that means making sure that you can run JavaScript in Node.js, because that's the runtime, and JavaScript can run in many different runtimes. So yeah, the build pack is just like a set of execution scripts that perform various tasks either at boot time or at build time. So, and when I say build time, there is we have backend JavaScript and front end JavaScript, and so build time would be if I was building like a JavaScript app, or like running a transpile, or if I was running building like a TypeScript app, and then I wanted to either upload those assets somewhere, or I would run that like JavaScript code in Node.js. Back to the question. So I'm in a fortunate situation where in my role, a lot of my role is actually, because the build packs are open source, a lot of my day-to-day is actually open source work, maintaining these projects. And then that also means I kind of have to be looking outward at what's going on in like the JavaScript ecosystem, making sure that everything works on Heroku. We've definitely run into some things where, maybe like this Angular app doesn't build. So I have to figure out what's going on there. Like, why isn't that working with like our particular Node environments? And that's kind of how I got involved with the Node project, because I was doing, before that, I was working a lot with front end. And then when I got to Heroku, I started doing back end. And then I transitioned into this role as like, the language owner. And that kind of opened up the door for like all of this backend kind of JavaScript stuff. And then, yeah, just kind of one thing led to another with my career. And it always like open source always like took up a huge chunk of that. Before I was like very heavily invested in Ember, and then, and then I just kind of moved into backend, and and that's how I got to do like primarily open source in my day job, which is pretty cool. I like, but yeah, back to like how, and then so like for the language owner part, because I had to be so heavily invested in, okay, like what's going on in like the Node ecosystem, all these releases. Node.js has releases every week, and they always have several active versions. And so just in order to be good at my job, I kind of got closer to the Node.js project and started getting to know people and getting involved. And then, I became a contributor. And then just like a couple of weeks ago, I joined the release team. So now, because that's like really where I'm heavily invested for my day job. And I say day job, I'm still doing Node.js work during the day, but I don't know why I just refer to it as my day job, because it's who pays me. But but yeah, and so I guess, the way that I like each time I did get involved in open source, it was very heavily related to what I was doing. That was kind of like, what I was supposed to be doing at work. And it really benefits my work and like my code to know, to kind of have a hand in, okay, like this is what's going on in the ecosystem. Like, how can I help? And then, in the long term, open source is for everyone. So it's also like giving back too.
Cool. That's really awesome. It seems like one thing led to another, and you became more and more involved with open source and with Node. What does it mean to be part of the release team for Node.js?
Yeah, so so there's a release team for Node.js. They have several versions that are released so there's like several tiers. So I'll just say like release team, meaning releasers, specifically people that release Node.js versions. And there's like a whole process with that because Node.js is a very active project. And they're always maintaining at least 3, maybe 4 versions at once. And so there's one that gets, there's one that's kind of like in in maintenance mode. There will be a version that's kind of like the active one. And then there's one that's more of an edge version. So it gets like the newest, it may not be stable, it gets the newest releases. Well, it's stable, but it just has more it has more features. So there's a lot of people that have to be involved in that. And so if you're a releaser, you are responsible for taking all of the commits and kind of building a release and then releasing it to the, open web, I guess. And so that people can, companies like Heroku or just, any company that's running Node.js, they can download those binaries and run and create their JavaScript environment for doing, whatever they need to do.
That's really amazing. Too often when I think of open source, I just think about code contributions, but there's so many more different ways to contribute within the community, and every bit is very important. So
Yeah.
Thank you for, that's awesome, Danielle. Melanie, I'm gonna go to next. What has your involvement with the Ember.js community been like? And I kind of heard from Jess and Danielle on how open source has really impacted their careers, and I'd be curious to learn how it's impacted your career as well.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great question. So I got involved with Ember because I got a job that used Ember, and I quickly discovered JavaScript frameworks don't really focus on digital accessibility, which is my area of expertise. In addition to my other work, I'm also a member of the WAI ARIA working group, which writes the specification for browsers and authors around digital accessibility. So I sort of just showed up to an EmberConf one year, and I was just very enthusiastic. I am one of those people that believe that when you're in the place doing the thing, be the person in the place doing the thing. And it's okay to be excited and enthusiastic about what you're doing. Be so enthusiastic they can't ignore you, something like that. And that's just kind of, oh, hi, there's room for you here. Please come be involved. And the Ember community is incredibly welcoming that way. And I quickly joined the learning team, which helps. We look at the documents and we think, can we learn from these documents? And do we think other people can learn from these documents? And it's really, and then we maintain them. So every release, new version of Ember, there's a updated version of the guides and the API docs. And so then they thought, well, we could really use someone on the core team who knows about digital accessibility, because I kept bringing it up like, hey, we need to stop releasing new features that are not accessible by default. And also here's this other laundry list of things that are not accessible by default. And do you think we could work on that? So they invited me to join the core team as sort of the accessibility SME. which I said no the first time because no, I'm not good enough at this to be on a core team. Are you crazy? Like, no, that's not something. And then they were like, yes, you are, you can, and you should do this because other people need to see you here too. Like, and then I was like, oh, well, okay, fine then. And I just asked for a lot of help and cultivate an environment where it's okay to ask for a lot of help. Like, I need that environment to exist, so I purposefully cultivate it. And that's sort of how my role got started. And now I'm on the steering committee, which is the governance committee for Ember as well. Really looking at ways to make Ember even more inclusive and inviting, purposefully inclusive, purposefully inviting, like going out and doing the work to make it that way. Because it is sort of that way already. We have a really good code of conduct, and the community is not your typical JavaScript community, I have to say. Very, very inviting and very polite. Makes it easy to exist, but we need to do more than that, right? We've learned, especially in the last few years, we need to do more work than that. So that's sort of what I'm doing, how I'm trying to help on the steering committee. And gosh, we're always looking for more contributors, absolutely always, especially on the learning team. Our learning team core team meetings are open, so anybody who wants to can attend one and give ideas and comment on the things that we're talking about. And we really in Ember try to do all of our work out in the open because we think that's the best for everyone. It really gives people a chance to participate as they want to, no pressure. So that's how my day job became my open source, became my life. And it's pretty awesome. I really love it. I really love what I do. I really love working in accessibility and Ember kind of all together. It just gives me a lot of happy feels. So
That's really awesome. And I think it's really amazing how you sort of, brought something that you're passionate about into a community and brought more awareness and inclusivity into the community through your work on open source. I think that's really cool to think about. Like, DNI is not just about working with HR departments to hire more diverse candidates. It's also about being out there and being a leader in the community. So that's really cool. I'm curious to know, you contribute to Ember, you're on the steering committee, you're the subject matter expert for accessibility, but you also are a senior software engineer at LinkedIn. How do you balance all this community and open source work with your real day job?
Yeah, so turns out my real day job is to make Ember more accessible. Because LinkedIn is the world's largest single page application, and the web version is Ember. So if we can make it easier for developers at LinkedIn to make accessible applications, how do we do that? Some of that is through, I'm working on a template linting initiative right now, where I'm taking every single way your app could feel digital accessibility, and I'm evaluating whether or not a template linting rule could be written to prevent that in your IDE. Can your IDE tell you while you're typing your code that you're doing something not accessible? And that's been slowly but surely moving along, and some other team members are doing work now to make sure that linter is implemented across all our code bases, so everyone really gets kind of that same experience. I also, the way I balance is I multiply myself. And this is really important because I can't do all of this work. It's way too much work to do alone. So I have to be a force multiplier. So I have to be very organized. What are my absolute priorities? And then break the work up in open source as much as possible. Sometimes it can't be, but as much as possible, break this work up into open source. We started the Ember accessibility community team, and we met once a week for like 4 months. We tackled a very specific set of issues. We had some lovely, actually, participation from Heroku from some of Danielle's colleagues. And other companies are willing to invest in open source when there's clear leadership, when there's a clear roadmap, when there's a clear business value that is shown through the plan. Here's exactly what we're going to work on. Here's what our outcomes are going to be, and here's the value of it. We managed to ship 4 new RFCs during this time of Corona. I think the Ember accessibility team has really kicked ass this year, pardon my French, and really just, we were really focused, and that was a really great lesson for me. Like, be the force multiplier, organize the work as a subject matter expert, and allow other people to step up, give them that room to breathe and participate and create this thing as well. So that's sort of my secret to balancing it.
I think that's really, really amazing, because in that way you're not just, you know, growing yourself as a leader, but you're mentoring and onboarding others to bring them onto this community and have be. That's super amazing.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Melanie. Renee, I'm gonna go to you and, you know, have us sort of talk to the group about your journey with open source and your involvement with the Postgres community.
Yes, hi, thanks for having me. My participation mirrors Jessica and Melanie's in that I just was showing up and had a lot of questions. So I am a career changer into tech, and I envisioned that attending meetups would be a good way to get to know people who might have connections for jobs, because networking is one of the best ways to find your next position. So one of these meetups, I just got real comfortable and was helping move chairs, and that was, you know, putting them back where they belonged, because there were other people who were doing that work. And then someone asked me if I could, at the next meetup, help let people in at the door. And then before I knew it, I was inviting speakers and tracking down spaces and coordinating for what is often considered like soft skills and isn't necessarily visible in a lot of communities as the glue work that holds things together. And then I started attending bigger conferences and was encouraged to speak at a conference by another woman. Her name is Louise. And this encouragement was really great because she stuck with it. She said to me at the conference dinner that we were at, "Your ideas on this are really interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing that talk." And I was like, "Oh, haha, yeah, sure. I'll submit a talk someday." And then she was on a speaker selection committee and reached out to me a couple of weeks later and said, "I haven't seen your submission yet." And I said, "Oh, ask me next week." And then a week, like, she's literally sent a calendar. I set herself a calendar reminder, and the next week said, "Haven't seen your submission yet." So I submitted a talk and was not expecting it to get accepted. So I said, well, while I'm practicing submitting talks, I'll also submit a talk in a nearby city, because these were talks in Europe. And I said, well, if I have any chance of going to Europe, I might as well make it worth it. Both of my talks were selected. And so what I noticed was that the meetup I really wanted to see here in New York City did not exist. So I needed to make it. I needed to find and collect the group of people who really didn't look like me in tech. I needed people with truly different perspectives from my own. So I have been inviting people from all over this region really to come speak at meetups, to people who are interested in data and databases, of course, with a Postgres focus, but really any data related topic is very wonderful. So I've been doing that for a while and really, really loving it. Of course, in this times that we're having now, we haven't had a meetup in a bit, but looking forward to figuring out how to arrange online meetups. So you are setting a really great example in setting up this collaboration here. And I think this is a good format for it. So yeah, showing up, asking a lot of questions, offering to help. I also participated a little tiny bit in the creation of the glossary for Postgres. We didn't used to have anything in our documentation that was like, what is a table? What is a tuple? So we collected several terms and said, we need to define these terms. so that is now included in version 13. So that's really nice, making that documentation a little easier to learn from for people who may be new to the system.
That's really cool. And I think it's really important to think about, back to this theme of it's more than just contributing code to open source. Speaking is a huge part of being a part of the community and speaking at conferences, both local and far away, and virtual ones as well, as well as coordinating meetups. So I guess in your experience with, speaking with the community and hosting these meetups, which is amazing that you just identify, there's a need for this and I am going to do it. What kind of feedback have you gotten from other community members?
So the feedback that I've taken most to heart is actually that our name is not super inclusive. So the name is Postgres Women, and it's named because a group of people in Europe really were focused on getting more women to speak at events. And so I thought, well, this is a name that already has some recognition. It's already a community involved name. So I said, well, Postgres Women NYC can be sort of a satellite of that. But it's been, I kind of knew, like, I'm not super comfortable with this name, but several people have said to me, this name does not suggest that as a non-binary person, I'd be welcome in this space, or as a trans guy, can I come to this space? Or as a man of color who is marginalized in so many ways in the tech community, am I welcome in this space? And so I want the answer to those questions to be, if you're willing to participate and abide by our code of conduct, yes, anybody can come. So I'm thinking of renaming it Postgres Connections, because the way you talk to the database is through a connection, and I think that's a really nice pun, but I'm certainly open to additional new names that suggest that really everyone is welcome if you're going to if you want to be a part of it. I'm really inspired also by Reshma Sheikh's naming of her newish group, Data Umbrella, which is a really nice way of her signposting that she's inclusive. So that's been the feedback that I've most appreciated, and I'm working hardest to bring forward, like, into the world. As far as the next best piece of feedback I've gotten is the speakers have all said that they've really had a great time coming when they were coming to the events to talk, and that they learned a lot by putting their thoughts into a presentation. It really crystallized for them the places where they were having trouble, or crystallized for them the way that they explain things to other technologists who are struggling with something that they're an expert in.
I mean, that's incredibly, like, amazing of you to go through the process of hearing feedback from the community and really thinking it through and thinking through next steps, and making sure that you're building a inclusive community. So I'm so touched on that, and it actually sort of brings me to my next topic, which is this year in particular there was a feedback from open source maintainers to the Hacktoberfest organizers that, it can be very challenging during Hacktoberfest when there are a lot of more spammy pull requests for people who are just trying to get participation credit. And on top of that, not to mention that there is commonly a trope around challenges for women and minorities in open source because their pull requests and contributions tend to be more scrutinized. So my question for the group is, what challenges have you faced in your open source community experience, and how did you overcome that, or what lessons have you learned in open source? And sort of a broad question, I'll let each of the panelists answer, and to facilitate, I'm going to pick on Danielle to start us off.
Okay, let's see. So the first question about, yeah, I definitely feel that on kind of like the spammy pull requests. I think that like that in my opinion, that's definitely something I know that is a concern on Node. I don't get that much on the build packs. I think it's just because mostly the people that open pull requests and issues on Heroku, they probably understand like what the code, what the software is, and people that kind of are drive-by. I do get drive-bys, but I think that like if you don't really know what Heroku is or what it is, it's not like a project that's going to stand out to you. But yeah, I definitely feel that. I think it really comes from like a lack of really like that open source is actually something that people want encouragement, or people that are involved, they want you to like open issues and to create pull requests for like typos on documentation. Like there are so many ways to get involved. And I think that like sometimes the way that Hacktoberfest is like communicated, they kind of miss the mark on like, here are the useful ways that you can contribute. I saw something where, you know, like people say, oh, like this is the easy way to contribute. And it's like, well, what are you actually trying to get out of that? If you want a free t-shirt, or if you want, you know, whatever, then that, I mean, I guess that's okay if that's how you want to, you know, be involved, or just be involved in any coding or software. But I think that, yeah, like if there was a little bit better communication around how like you can be involved, and there is like a way to be impactful, and like typos and like making edits to websites and all of these things are like different ways that you can be involved in open source. I think that one of the ways that is not highlighted enough is that there's a lot of open source projects that are for social good. I can't think of any off the top of my head right now because I'm on the spot, but there are a lot of ways to get involved with open source that would be considered like volunteer work, or you know, it's like for websites that help people, you know, different organizations in like your city and whatnot. There's a lot of stuff like that here in New York City. So just looking for those projects, like it's not like super technical work. It's just like a website that has open source stuff. And if there's a maintainer, you know, they probably like flagged a couple issues. It's like, oh, we have to do this, we have to do that. And those are meant for people that want to get involved to pick up those tasks and say, I want to be involved in this. This is something that looks like it's important to me. But it's hard because, you know, open source is mostly unpaid work, and a lot of open source maintainers unfortunately, you know, burn out because there's a lot of which actually leads me to my next point of like, I do think that it is a little bit easy for people to demand things from open source maintainers because it is such like a huge responsibility. If you're, you know, maintaining a project that, you know, there's hundreds of thousands of downloads per week or whatever. And people they can be mean. You know, I've definitely like seen some craziness, but for the most part, a lot of people, well, for the most part, it's really not, I try to keep in mind just dealing with people on the internet. Like I get stuff all the time where people are like, oh, we want this on Heroku and that on Heroku. And it's just like, you kind of have to have a thick skin about it and just say, okay, like, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're not going to do. And, you know, and these people that are on the internet and just kind of like hiding behind a GitHub avatar, it's just like, it's not really about you. It's really about them if they're being mean. I just kind of think of it as like, how sad does that person have to be that they're like attacking me, you know, online? It's not really like, it doesn't make any difference in my real life, you know, but obviously they've taken the time to do this, and that's really a reflection on them. Plus it just, since all of that is open, it really just makes them look bad. And if they do continue to act like that, a lot of open source projects will, if they have like a good code of conduct in place, they will ban people for, they'll block them from the project if they're, you know, spammy or if they're abusive in their language or whatever, because it's not nice, and we don't want to make environments where people are uncomfortable. So, yeah.
I think that's really great insight. You know, the people in it for the free t-shirts will continue to exist, but that is their problem. And it's important as individuals to focus on out of this, what input I want to make, and that as your front focus instead of, the spammers and trolls on the internet. So very much appreciate you sharing your story here. Jessica, I'm wondering if, when you were a maintainer for Project Jupyter, how you engaged with the community there, and how did you balance the excuse me, my internet was cutting out. Jess, I'm wondering, a question for you is, when you're a maintainer for Jupyter, what was your engagement with the community like? And I'm sure you got plenty of requests and feedback from the community, how you balance and communicate. Oh, Jess, you're on mute if you're trying to speak.
Yeah, I think at least in the Jupyter community, there are multiple projects, so different projects have different cultures. But I would say in general, I think that I would generally consider myself very lucky in terms of my experience as a maintainer, as someone who contributes to open source. I've been really lucky. I would say that a lot of the source of this luck is because of the fact that I often made contributions to things in which I had personal relationships involved with people who were maintainers, and that allowed me to have some sort of direct connection in case something happened. So I would say, first of all, that's not necessarily something that's accessible to everyone. That's not necessarily easily done. So, I would definitely first say that makes me very fortunate. And additionally, I feel as if, the culture of Project Jupyter has been very aware of the existence of maintainer burnout. And so there has been a lot of patience among each other's maintainers to take what time you need and things like that in order to take care of oneself again. So that has led me to be very, very fortunate. I think in general, the kinds of etiquette that is expected for open source projects that I have advocated for is to specifically look for issues that that exist and have been looked at by a maintainer and have been particularly targeted as something that needs to be worked on. So oftentimes the way you can tell that is if there is an existence of tags on GitHub. That's something we commonly do. We'll look through things and maybe we'll say, oh, we can't take care of this right now, or oh, this sounds like something maybe you could build on the side. Why don't you do that? And that sort of triage is where a lot of that happens. And so in that case, it also is really useful for the user to gauge, what time commitment this is, and what the right, what should be done. And that way you can say oh, I volunteer to do this. And so, we know that this is coming. If this doesn't happen, then you might end up in a situation where you have a drive-by pull request. And for us, the more frustrating issue that might happen for me might not necessarily even be there's a pull request and person's putting it out there. It's oftentimes the person maybe makes the pull request, but then we say, hey, could you make these changes? And then don't hear from them. That's not necessarily the case with Hacktoberfest. At least at Project Jupyter, there has been an attempt to try to go through things and say, oh, these are ones we would really love people to do for Hacktoberfest. So that's generally useful. I would say, try to engage politely with people online who are maintainers. And if there is a code of conduct, and luckily, GitHub makes it very easy to know if there's a code of conduct on that repository, ideally the maintainers will also hold to that code of conduct. I would say at least in the Jupyter community, that's been really great. One challenge, at least that Jupyter has in terms of its own accessibility, is oftentimes the users of the software itself don't necessarily always have a skill match with the kind of technology necessary to contribute. So that's I think a fundamental issue in a lot of data science and machine learning tools, is that the kinds of software you might write as a data scientist or like as a machine learning engineer, it's not necessarily the kind of thing that you would be using to maintain the tool. So for example, the Jupyter Notebook is a lot of JavaScript. Most data scientists write R or Python, maybe they write some Julia. They don't necessarily write as much JavaScript. And so there is that gap. I think that in terms of accessibility, one thing that I think a lot of libraries in the data science ecosystem need to work on is like figuring out a way that we can onboard people better. Like you have this project, you're really passionate about it. What technologies do you need to learn to maintain it? And this isn't necessarily even a criticism to Jupyter. I think this is a criticism of a lot of libraries I maintained. Like, so for example, I maintained a machine learning library that had an API in Python, but under the hood, it was all like C++. A lot of machine learning researchers don't write C++ anymore. So I would say that that's a fundamental issue. I mean, obviously, I know, other panelists have mentioned this, but I think in terms of just broad inclusion, we're still not doing enough. I think that we're not, I think we try, but I think that the amount of effort necessary is going to be a lot more than we have done. And it's historically been not prioritized because we feel so stretched thin to begin with, that it's really hard for us to see like, oh yes, we will go that extra mile for someone we don't see exists, but they're there. And so I think that's still like a fundamental issue that we need to figure out how to do. And I think this is something that all open source projects have, but with regards to inclusion, we can say like, oh, we're trying to be welcoming, and I think we do try, but when people just feel really stretched thin, it's really hard to put out that extra effort. And I think it might require additional people getting involved to really increase that bandwidth. And so yeah, I think that there's a lot of I think that hasn't necessarily, so as a result for me, like I haven't necessarily not felt welcomed, but I also know that like a lot of open source projects just haven't gone out of their way to say, we need you here, we need you to come. And so I think that's something that we need to work on.
Jess, so I'd love to share a couple of things that we've done in the Ember community to specifically address that. We definitely use a good first issue label, PR welcome label. We spend time especially on the learning team, going through issues and trying to mark them for new contributors. We regularly hold new contributor workshops where we'll pair with you and we'll actually show you how to get spun up and how to start becoming a contributor. And we have people in the community who that's the way they contribute. They are experts who contribute by pairing with others to get them to contribute. It is a lot of extra work. And I think that's the part where someone else who is focused just on that can really be valuable to any core team. And we found a lot of value in that. I even spun up my own Hacktoberfest kind of project that didn't have anything to do with Ember other than it was an Ember app. It was more to do with accessibility, but with really well-defined issues that were marked and labeled really well. I had contributors that I didn't know at all. They just found it through the right labels and stuff and have helped make the project better, because I don't have time for all this stuff, or it would have taken me longer. But by having those regular contributor-focused events, we've found that there are a lot more people now contributing to Ember who maybe they were new, maybe they didn't realize that there's more than just code, right? Can you triage this issue and confirm that this issue exists? Can you improve the documentation? can you draw art, because we don't want our guides to be a giant wall of text because that's boring for everybody. All of those things, and we really make that, we're purposeful about telling everyone there's a lot of ways to be a contributor. We want to help you be a contributor, and we've had a lot of success with it. So that's definitely something that I would encourage folks to do.
Melanie, that's really awesome that you can share that amazing experience. For the group, if they are interested in the workshop and being a part of the Ember community, how can people get involved? Or how can they reach you or your Ember.js community?
Sure, yeah. I'm easiest to find on Twitter, but we also have a Discord server. And it is, hold on, I'll share the link in the channel. Definitely, once you arrive, we also have groups that we have private channels for, just to help groups feel connected and not quite as in the open, for women in tech, and for parents, and for the LGBTQIA+ community, and for people of color. However, whatever group you want to identify with, if you just let us know when you arrive, and if you want to connect with that group, we'll give you those permissions for that channel. But then just let me know that you'll see me. I'm the server admin, so I'm definitely there. And I'm also really happy to connect with anyone who wants to do something similar in their own community. You know, the Ember community has been around for, gosh, like 12 years now, which is like forever in JavaScript years. So we have a lot of lessons learned and ways we've grown, and you know, just spinning up a Discord server took a lot of work, and I'm always happy to share any of that information with anyone else who's looking to grow their own community.
Okay. That's so amazing and welcoming of you, Maggie. I think one of the things that the panelists have all mentioned is a lot of this is end up being about networking, meeting people and building relationships, and leveraging those relationships to help you grow your own career. So I think, Melanie, I probably will have questions for you about how to keep open source more inclusive, and I'm really grateful that you shared all that. So just wrapping up the panel here, I think I saw one question from the chat earlier on, which is, as a beginner, how do you get started? How do you get involved? And Renee, I'm hoping that you might be able to address this, although if any of the other panelists want to weigh in, please do the hand raise flag as well.
Yes, absolutely. The Postgres community does their code changes in an interesting, to me, way. They do it mostly over email on what's called the hackers list. Postgres QL.org has lists to mailing lists, so you can sign up for a Postgres account. You can even become a member. You get a cool challenge coin in the mail, and you can participate in the mailing lists in a number of ways. One, I suggest that people read for a couple of weeks. You also can get into the archives and read, and the archives are searchable. So if there's something that's giving you trouble with Postgres, you can say, oh, am I the first person that's had this problem or asked this question? And it's a little bit better than, say, rhymes with smack over show. Series of questions might get you. And then you can begin asking your own questions and say, hey, I'm having this issue. It's similar to this issue that I've seen, but like different in a bit of a way. And then you'll also notice in the mailing list that people are suggesting things that could be added, additional features or extensions. And then the responses that people give are extremely thoughtful. Things like, oh, these 3 people have been working on that extension for a decade. Here are some of the problems that we've heard them say that they've had with it. If you have anything else to add, feel free to link up with them to work on building it. Or This extension that you're suggesting is not a priority for us. We simply don't have the bandwidth to do that. The team of committers, the people who hold the commit bits, when they agree to let a change into Postgres, they themselves, in continuity with the author of a patch or an extension, take lifetime responsibility for maintaining that patch or extension. And so if you want to contribute to the Postgres community, you're kind of in it for life to make sure that it moves forward with the core code. Postgres is written in C, so if you have experience writing in C, then you're a shoo-in for the Postgres community. But like I mentioned earlier, there's documentation that always needs people to look at it. One of the jokes about Postgres is that the best thing about our documentation is that it's pretty good. And the worst thing about our documentation is that it's pretty good, because when you don't find something you're looking for, it can be very surprising to say, oh, it's got all this other great stuff. How could it not have a glossary? And so you might have in previous times spent a lot of time looking for a glossary. And then finally someone said, hey, there's no glossary and this has to change. And then that got the ball rolling.
Renee, I was wondering, you mentioned this list. If you can post information on how people who are interested in getting started can be a part of this hacker list in the chat, or send it to us and we can send out an email afterward. I think
I'm going to postgres.org right now, and it's in I believe it's in the community, and then there's mailing lists. So I'm just posting a link straight to mailing lists here in the Zoom. And if you take the list off, then you get to the homepage for postgres.org. There is also a US-based organization, postgresus.org. So PostgreSQL is an international nonprofit that supports Postgres all over the world, and Postgres US supports the encouragement to use Postgres here in the Americas. So it's two great ways to get started.
Awesome. I think that's really amazing, and I think I'm hoping that people can follow up with you if they have questions as well.
Absolutely. I'm on Twitter as well, so I'm putting my Twitter on here. Is at Data Renee, fairly easy to remember.
Since we are technically at time, I'm gonna toss it off to Danielle for some closing remarks on advice for the group. And then I believe Abby actually has a couple of announcements if people want to stay over. But Danielle, I'm going to hand it off to you to close out.
Oh gosh, that's so much pressure. Well, no, I just wanted to give tips for beginners also. I guess I'll try to make it quick since we are at time. I think like just going off of what Melanie said, like don't underestimate like the power of just jumping onto a repo and looking for, like a lot of projects have tags that are saying, oh, we want help on this. That means they want help. They are looking for you. So just pull it down, like spend some time getting familiar with the code base and figure out how you can contribute. I think that's like a great way to get started. Another thing is that I had one more thought and I forgot it. Yeah, I mean, that's, dang it. Oh, well, I forgot because I was
tweet
trying
it when
to
you
be
remember.
quick. Yeah, I had a couple of thoughts and then I just forgot them all. But yeah, I mean, open source is fun. And oh, I know what it was. Okay, so, and then another thing is that a lot of these open source communities, again, just going off what Melanie was saying, there's a lot of meetings that they have for different committees and whatnot. And a lot of these things are open and the invites are public. And there's a reason that those are public, and it's because they want people to get involved. They want people to show up. And that's actually how I got involved with Ember, and that's how I got involved with Node.js. I just started like going to meetings and was like, I want to learn how to do this. And people are there to help. They want to mentor. They want to get more people involved because, it's great to have a lot of people involved, but also like open source is hard work, and people that are heavily involved, they want to distribute that responsibility to people that they, that they have experience with and they have, developed relationships with and work with. So that's it. I just wanted to throw that in.
I think that's a really amazing summary, just based on the conversation from the panelists today. As people want to be successful, and open source is about, coming together as a community, and that doesn't mean you have to do all the work yourself, but there is more of a distribution as well. So thank you so much to all of our panelists. Thank you, Danielle, Melanie, Renee, Jessica. Thank you everyone who joined us. I know we're a few minutes over, so thank you for sticking with us.
And thank you to our moderator.
Thanks. Abby, I think you had a couple quick announcements for Women Who Code, and then I think we can close out.
Yes, fantastic. Fantastic answers, everyone. It was really exciting. And I think, thank you to Danielle, Melanie, Renee, Jessica, but also to Jackie for organizing this and helping us out and asking such interesting questions. I had 3 key announcements for today. The first thing is Women Who Code Connect, which is a global conference for Women Who Code, is accepting proposals right now. So you can actually speak at the conference. The deadline to submit proposals is this October 30th. I'll send you a link to that one. The second announcement is Women Who Color. So it's more so by non-focus. They have a cohort application for Women of Color, and they're allowing a Slack group where they break people down into groups of 4 or 5 where you can get mentorship. So if you're just getting started in open source, that's also a really interesting place to get started in. And the third thing is a new position. So there's this company called Pointer in LA, which is looking for senior full stack engineers. So if you're looking for jobs, do apply to that one. And I'll share all the links on the meetups as well.
Cool. Well, thank you everyone for coming. I also saved the chat, so I think in Meetup we can also send out the wonderful links that our panelists have been sharing too. So thanks everyone so much for coming, and we hope to see you at a virtual event soon. All right, bye.
Thank you. Bye.